Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you here today. We're going to focus during the month of August. We're going to be focusing on strategic planning. And we have a number of meetings that are designed to help you go through the entire process. So we'll go through the strategic planning process from start to finish during the month of August. And today is our first webinar. We're going to be focusing on how to do a community needs assessment, because as you may or may not know, before you do any strategic planning process, you need to really understand what's going on in the community so that you can position your organization to be responsive to the changes in the community. So today we're going to do a webinar on the community needs assessment, and then we'll also share with you the notebook that we have for our members to actually, jot down some notes and really think about what's going on in the community. And then next week we'll be talking about the theory of change. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pull up my presentation and we will get started. Okay, I need to share the screen, of course. That always helps. If you can just bear with me, I'm going to be sharing my screen. Okay, welcome, Lauren, and then someone else just joined us by phone.
Good morning, Valerie. It's Patrice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, and yourself?
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for doing it.
Okay, awesome. I am getting ready to share my screen, and then we'll start the presentation.
The workbook, I was having trouble trying to figure out where it is so I could print it out. I haven't been able to find it yet.
Okay, it's in the form. I'll upload it again because I posted it a while ago, and there's a lot of.
Oh, okay, that's why. Yeah, because I've just been getting on recently, so I wouldn't have seen it.
Right there. Yeah, there's a lot of content, but I'll make sure that I send it out to the members when we get off.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for asking. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
I'm on the phone, so I'm
Oh, that's right. You can't see the screen.
No, I can't.
All right. If you could, that would be wonderful, right? Okay, but I'll make sure that the community also gets this video. All right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my problem is the Zoom. I'm at work, and so the Zoom on my computer does, because it's an old operating system, I think it doesn't access Zoom, and so I haven't been able to do that. I've been doing telephone Zoom things.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, great. All righty, and Lauren, thank you so much for letting me know that you could see as well. All righty, so we're going to get started. We're going to focus on how to conduct a community needs assessment. And before we do that, I always like to tell people about Nonprofit Utopia and who we are. So we're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and we've created a safe space where our members can share lessons learned, share some of the issues that they're having starting their nonprofits. And we have conversations that are pretty candid. And we also have a number of opportunities. We've got downloadable courses, we got webinars, and when we don't have COVID-19, we actually can get together in a physical space. And our mission is to provide ongoing professional development and networking opportunities in which experienced nonprofit professionals can share expertise with the next generation of ethical leaders. And in fact, to summarize it, our mission is really to train the next generation of leaders. And the overarching goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need to develop strong organizations that are going to make a lasting impact. But most importantly, we have designed our materials such that they can develop themselves as well as their organization. So our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for up to 50,000 emerging nonprofit leaders around the world between now and 2033. And
why 2033?
I gave myself, I believe, 20 years when I
Oh,
started.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, yep. So yeah, when we launched a couple years ago, that was the goal.
Okay, that's an excellent goal.
Thank you. It's a big hairy goal. We're plugging away. Got a long way to
Right.
go.
Hey, a day at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, we're eating that elephant. All
Mhm.
right. So a little bit about myself. As you know, I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia, but I also host a Nonprofit Utopia podcast. We're on hiatus right about now, and we plan to start back up in September. And we're going to create shows that are not only podcasts that you can listen to on Blog Talk Radio, but we're also going to, at the same time, create a visual experience. So we'll be looking at two different media at the same time, as opposed to just using the voice. And I'm sorry. And then also about myself, I am, as I mentioned, not only have I started Nonprofit Utopia, but I'm on staff at UIC in their nonprofit management program. I'm also on staff at Roosevelt teaching social enterprise.
And
And we
what is
have,
social enterprise?
yes, social enterprise. Okay, you're looking at organizations that may or may not be nonprofit. They could be for-profit or nonprofit, and they have a social mission. So if
Oh,
you
okay.
are in business and you want to make a profit and not necessarily go through the process of running a nonprofit, you might have a social mission that, say, for example, you want to impact the environment some way, or you want to
Mhm.
hire people from marginalized communities. And you
Okay.
basically want to do good things while you make
Oh, okay.
money. So I
Oh,
guess
oh,
that's,
that sounds like a good way to go.
yes. And so you have some nonprofits in that space as well. And
Mhm.
what makes a nonprofit a social enterprise is not just the fact that they're mission driven, but they also have created a separate revenue stream beyond grants. So they're actually generating a product or service that they can charge money for and generate
Mhm.
revenue, and not necessarily relying solely on foundations and the government for grants.
Mhm.
So, and yeah, I've got, a couple of, webinars on social enterprise as well. So you're in the right place.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. All right, so we've got quite a bit to cover. We're going to talk about conducting a community needs assessment. We'll also talk about the relationships between the community needs assessment, a theory of change, and a program logic model. And we're not necessarily going to go into those at length, because we have a whole separate webinar on those two things. We're going to also talk about how you can use the program logic model to conceptualize your programs. Again, we're focusing on strategic planning, which is a higher level, but we will, talk about how that relates, because once you start your strategic plan, you have to drill down to the program level. We'll also talk about asset mapping. We'll talk about the 7 triggers for a community needs assessment, the 4 things you have to do in order to justify the need for your programs and services, what to do when it seems like there are too many players in the market to gain traction, and then how to respond to funders' concerns regarding potential duplication of services. So if you come from a community like I come from, I'm from North Lawndale, and we have over 200 registered organizations, not to mention the
wow.
churches. Yeah, a lot of nonprofits, not to mention the churches and block clubs. So people are wondering, one, if you got all those organizations, why don't we see more impact? And then two,
Mhm.
do we really, really need another organization? So that's that's a topic
Wow.
of another webinar, but I thought it
Okay.
was really important for us to be able to demonstrate need even in those
Mhm.
communities that are
Right.
considered over, oversaturated.
Saturated. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for helping me find that word. I was like, okay, what's the word? All righty. So we're going to talk about asset-based community development. And when we talk about asset-based community development, we're really looking at the fact that every community, I don't care what the community looks like, there are people, there are institutions, there are organizations in that community that hold the answers to all the problems that plague that community. So it focuses on an inside out approach. And then it also focuses not so much on need, but it focuses on what we already have. So the people in the community are central to whatever the problems are, and we're focusing on the assets as opposed to needs, as opposed to deficits. So we're not looking at, oh, what's wrong with those people, what's wrong with the community. We're going to look at what's right with the community and build from there. And then when we look at the community needs assessment, you can do a community needs assessment not only for a strategic planning process, but you can use it for policy and advocacy. You can use it for program development. And in an ideal sense, even before you start an organization. So it's a way of gauging opinions, assumptions, the needs and key issues or assets within a community. So again, we're going to focus, even though we're calling it a needs assessment, we're going to focus it on the assets. We're going to look at the positive for the communities. So again, there are a number of reasons that you might want to develop a community needs assessment. And I think I touched on most of these, but you can use the community needs assessment for proposals for new programs, to improve new programs, because you always want to keep your finger on the pulse as to what's going on in the community and make sure that your organization is positioned for those changes, not only as an organization, but also as a program. All right, so you want to use the community needs assessment to describe the current lay of the land. And in this COVID-19 environment, I think now is a very, very good time to update your community needs assessment, because the reality we're living in today, nobody would have ever thought, and no, I never thought we would be in this situation, just a year ago, even not even a year ago, maybe 5 or 6 months ago. This just was not conceivable to me. You also want to use the community needs assessment to identify community needs, their concerns and issues, to develop marketing strategies. You also can use it to galvanize grassroots action around needs or certain issues, like now is a really good time. We're coming into a presidential election. I would imagine that those people who are developing election strategies are looking at what's going on in the ground, and they're coming up with different issues that need correcting, and they'll use that for their campaign. You can use community needs assessments to determine whether or not needs have changed. And you can also use it to collect the community's hopes and desires. And that comes from Charlie French from Community and Economic Development. He's a community economic development specialist with the University of New Hampshire. All right, and then you want to make sure that your programs remain relevant. All right, so there are 7 basic triggers for community needs assessment. And as I mentioned before, you ideally want to do a community needs assessment before you even start a new organization. You know, all too often we start new organizations based on what we believe we know without necessarily looking at the data to know that we really know. So it's always good to do a community needs assessment before you start an organization. And for us, we're doing the strategic planning month, and we're going to be focusing on how this can be used with our strategic plans. And then we're going to also look at the fact that you use them for developing a proposal or a case for support. And your case for support is a conversation that you're having with your funders. You're really making, I guess, the case, or you're providing the data, you're providing a reason for the funders to fund you, but that needs to be grounded in the reality of what's going on the ground. And then you could use a community needs assessment, again, to start a program, to expand a program, to improve a program, to start or expand a service. And the difference between a program and a service is, you know, both a program and service are designed to actually improve the lot of your clients or the community. But a program is more scientific, you know, is based in evidence. You have, you know, you look at what's going on in the community, you develop goals and objectives and outcomes, and you have a certain set of activities that are meant to bring about a change. A service, on the other hand, we know it's good for the community, we know it's good for the people, but we don't really have that intentionality about, you know, making sure that we can prove that it is good for the community. So for example, a diet is a program. A service is a soup kitchen. A diet, you have specific weight goals or other health goals like your blood pressure and all that good stuff, and you have different ways to measure it. A soup kitchen, we're giving food away, but usually we don't collect any data other than where the people come from. So we know food is good for people, but there's no intentionality about using that food to actually improve a health condition. Okay, so I know I went off on a tangent, but sometimes we just get that confused, the programs and services. And then we need a community needs assessment to roll out a new product, and this would be part of your market analysis. And then again, we can use the community needs assessment to conduct an issue or advocacy campaign. So nonprofits, even though we're not supposed to be, and I'm not a nonprofit, I just have a tendency to say we, but nonprofits have a tendency to sometimes shy away from politics, thinking they may get in trouble. But it's important to know that nonprofits can get involved in issue and advocacy campaigns, and they can actually spend, you know, some significant time lobbying for change. But, you know, there are various rules around that. We won't go into that right now because that's not why we're here. But I just want to urge nonprofits to get involved and, you know, lobby for changes for the nonprofit sector that can impact your clients and community. All righty. Are there any questions before we go on to research methods? All righty.
No, so far so great. Pretty good.
Okay, awesome. I'm glad to hear it. Glad to Okay, just bear with me. I gotta move some things out of my way so I can see. So basically, there are a number of research methods. And before we go into that, I know I mentioned that we would talk a little bit about theory of change, and we'll talk a little bit about program logic models. Those particular slides are not here, but I did indicate that we would touch on them. And we'll talk more about a theory of change next week. But a theory of change is basically looking at what's going on in the environment, looking at what the issues are and so-called problems and who the problems might affect, and then looking at causes and effect, and then thinking of ways that you can bring about change using certain interventions. And, like I said, we'll talk more about that next week when we talk about a theory of change. And you really want to develop a theory of change as you're looking at what's going on in the community, because that will help you to develop what we would call an evidence-based strategic planning process, meaning your process is going to be based on the data of what's going on in the community, and it will be developed in such a way that since you know the causes of problems and the effects, you'll be able to develop interventions that are more likely to be successful, if that makes sense. All righty.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about the research methods, and research methods are basically, the ways that you're going to study a problem, the data that you're going to collect. And there are a number of ways that you can collect the data and then use the data to make informed decisions. Okay. Alrighty, so one way, and I guess this is one of the most common, is through quantitative methods. And quantitative methods, that's basically just focusing on numbers. So you're translating or you're making decisions based on what numeric data tell you. So these could be financial data, it could be census statistics, it could be things like the number of clients that you serve over time. It could be things like the number of housing units you produce over time. So again, those things that can be counted. And it helps to, when you're looking at cause and effect, so and when we talk about cause and effect, you're talking about for every number of units of this service provided, you're able to affect XYZ change and all that good stuff. It doesn't have to be that deep, but typically when you're looking at relationships, quantitative methods are a good way, and you can collect that information, through surveys and run all types of analyses. But you want to always develop a baseline. So you might want to do a before and after to see, to the extent that your intervention, your program or service is actually having an impact. So it's good to do a before and after survey or whatever to measure. And that's really good if you're going to do things like pre and post tests, to measure how much people have learned. It's good to, if you do what we call time series analysis, looking at a community and how the data for, poverty, income and all that stuff, reading scores and whatnot have changed over time. And then we look at qualitative methods, and qualitative methods are basically a way of getting behind the numbers, because as the data, the financial data or the numeric data doesn't always tell the full story. You really want to understand what else is going on. And so in that case, you might want to You might want to have interviews with your clients or stakeholders for a program. You might want to have focus groups, and all focus groups are is group interviews. You might want to observe people in action to see, how they're responding to say a presenter, or see how they're responding to a program, see if they're really understanding what, the lessons learned and all that good stuff. You can also do a document review, and you usually want to do a document review when you are analyzing, say, an organizational structure, to get a sense for who they are and where they're going, or where they said that they're going. You could also use a document review when you're analyzing a program and all that good stuff. You can also gather information from public meetings, listening to the feedback of the people who are participating in the meetings. And then, the qualitative methods, they're most appropriate. As I said before, you want to get behind the numbers. You want to tell a balanced story. And then you also want to get multiple viewpoints. And, sometimes a survey can't really capture everything that you're looking for. So you can get a feeling for attitudes for a program. You can get a feeling for not only attitudes, but, whether or not people really feel that the program is working, and why they feel it's not working. And you would want to do that, when we're talking about programs, you also want to do that before a strategic planning process, because you want to be able to develop strategies that are going to be responsive to the needs of the community, the needs of your clients. So there are a number of ways that you can collect those data. So you could do an empirical study, and an empirical study is just basically, an observation. So you could develop questionnaires and surveys and analyze those results. You can read other people's reports that have been generated and then compare the results that you're getting with those reports. You can also conduct interviews and focus groups of stakeholders. And it's always good to, when you're doing strategic planning, it's good to involve people who are not all in your organization, just to make sure that you can tailor your program to be responsive to the needs of people. Because I find that organizations naturally, no matter what the organization is, we naturally have a tendency to focus on our point of view. And sometimes we develop programs and services just thinking that people will come. However, when you involve other people, like clients, other people in the community, other organizations in the community, involve them in the process, and you can get feedback and perspectives that probably you wouldn't hear if if the organization just focused on the people who work there or who are on their board. And the second way of collecting the data is through spatial studies. And when we talk about spatial studies, we're basically talking about, the landscape. We're looking at visual data, we're looking at map data, and you can gather that information, you can gather it through the census. I believe they have a way of actually mapping those data. You can go to websites, from the city of Chicago or other municipalities, or, so the city government, the Department of Health, depending on what it is you're looking for, they have a number of maps that you can look at that will help you to really understand patterns. If you have a relationship with, say, the University of Illinois, where they can work with you to do what, use GIS data. And those data are basically based on the census, and they can have people to take the information from the census and generate a map that will do those, analyses for you. And then another way you can collect the data is through census tracts. And, those are publicly available. So you just download the data, and the census.gov website is so sophisticated now that, sometimes I wonder if you need to have a PhD in order to use some. You sound like you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, 10 years ago, it was very, very simple to go on census.gov and generate maps. Now it takes a little bit more study, but the good thing is they have a lot of videos, a lot of webinars that can help you, learn your way around, and you can create specific data sets. Because I know the tendency for us when we look at census data is to just look at, very high level statistics for any given community, like, age, sex, gender, whatever. But you could actually create data sets that are more specific to, block levels, neighborhood levels, and all that other stuff, whereas we tend to rely on city or state. But again, that's another webinar, and we can have someone who can actually come in and show us how to navigate census.gov. So again, where can I find the data? One place, if you're from Chicago, you can go to the Chicago Data Portal, and they got so much information. They got information on block clubs, information on housing, information on schools, whatever. Sometimes I think there's so much data that you can't use it because you get overwhelmed unless you really know what you're looking for, but the data are there. There's another website called the Preservation Compact, and that's more of a regional database where you're looking at public-private data so that you can really understand multifamily housing. So those are just two examples. And then again, you've got the City of Chicago GIS, and those are used to help you to generate maps and, look at your data and look at trends, based on, I guess, geography. And as I said before, you've got census.gov. Other tools include the literature review. In fact, you might want to start with the literature review because you want to see what other people have done, what other people have found, and then that will give you at least some understanding of the framework. And then as you do your original research, you can compare the results you get to what other people have found. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to find something new that other people haven't found, because typically when other people are doing research, they have a specific purpose, a specific target that may or may not coincide with the people that you're working with, because every geography is different. There may have been some time elapsed, a number of things that can cause a difference in the results. But just understanding the literature does help you to establish a baseline. And then you've got asset mapping, and you can use asset mapping literally and figuratively to determine, where the issues are, where the assets are, and all that good stuff. So, and I'm going to be sharing with you a couple examples. And they're basically, again, as I said before, you're focusing not so much on the needs of a community or a deficit of a community, but you're really, really focusing on what the community already has, starting from there, and then ways you can build around the people, the institutions, and the organizations. So again, you can get the information through focus group discussions and public meetings. And you also want to, in this case, we're looking at a framework where we're not necessarily looking at a physical map, but we're looking at a drawing. And then, I'll share that with you as we look at our workbook. All right, but for our purposes, the asset maps can be broken down into 7 different components. And you want to start off with the people. So you want to start off with the individuals, so these are people in the community who can make a difference. And it also depends too on what sector within the nonprofit sector you're working with. But basically, you're looking at people who can help the people that you need to help. So you want to start off with the target in the center and then branch out from there. So your individuals are going to be clients in the program. It's going to be people, within your organization. It could be other people within other organizations who all have a vested interest in solving the problem. And in the ideal sense, you really want to make sure that the people that you're focusing on are more residents, people who actually live in the community. I know all too often when we solve problems, the problems are being solved by organizations and institutions, and sometimes they may or may not include the individuals who actually live in the community. So you want to start with the people, start with your target, start with the people who live in the community, who are willing to contribute their time, their money, their experience, their capabilities, their passion. They're willing to advance the community. So again, the strongest asset-based development start with the people in the community. So if you look at communities, I'll say a good example would be Inglewood. They have very strong community networks here in Chicago, and they, the people in the community are the ones who have really, people who live in the community have really taken a vested interest in making sure that the community is improved. They laid the groundwork rather than focusing so much on having institutions come in and develop them. I'm not saying that they don't use institutions, but those initiatives are very, very strongly led and guided by the people who live there. After that is your local association. So imagine a bullseye. So at the center, you've got the people who live in the community. Then the next circle would be local associations. So these are not necessarily formal organizations, but they're loose affiliates. So they could be church ministries, they could be block clubs, they could be just a group of people who see an issue that needs to be fixed. And then after that, you have the formal organizations, and these are organizations that have actually been incorporated, and they're also hopefully working very, very closely with the people, who live in the community. Other organizations can also include your local businesses. And then after that, you have local institutions. So those institutions could be things like hospitals, they could be parks. So these are your long-standing organizations who can really, really bring resources to bear. After that, you want to look at the physical assets of the community, and that could include things like land, building, your transportation, and other facilities that can contribute to building the community up. And then after that, you want to look at the economic assets, and those include the things that people in the community produce and they consume in the community. So the stronger your local community, or the more your dollar turns around in the community, the stronger your economy is going to be. So if you're in a situation where there's not that much turnover of the dollar, that gives you somewhere to begin. And then when we look at economies, we don't necessarily look at the exchange of dollars, but we can also look at bartering, exchanging one service for goods and services. So that's a really good way to strengthen the local economy. You might start with bartering first and then work your way up to creating more value. All right. And then finally is the stories. We should never, ever overlook the stories of a community. In fact, one of the ways that you can preserve a community is through things like historic preservation and making sure that the community retains its character by keeping the stories intact. So often when we see new development, there's gentrification and people, the new developers come in and they either ignore the history of the community, and in some cases they might want to just create a whole new history and rebrand the community, and that could be very, very dangerous. So if you've got people in the community who are very, very vigilant and making sure that development is truly from the inside out, they're going to make sure that the stories and the history of that community are preserved. All right, are there any questions?
No.
Okay,
Been
great.
quite clear.
All
Thank
right,
you.
great. All right, thank you. All right, and that I take that as a huge compliment because you can't see these maps. So you can't.
I know what a bullseye looked like, so I've just been visualizing it, how it spreads out. So I'm good.
Okay, great. Now this is hard to describe. I'm sorry.
There are some questions on Facebook, but it's up to you if you want to read them now or at the end of the presentation.
Okay, it might be helpful since you can see them, Carlina, and I can't. It might be helpful for you to read them.
Right now or at the end of the presentation?
How about right now?
Okay, so I have here, let me just tell you. So Janice says that too many times in our community, people from outside of the community come in and do the assessment and they don't meet the needs of the residents.
That's true. That's very, very true. That's why it's really, really, and thank you for that. It's really important for the community residents to take control of these processes. I've seen, and I'm sure everybody on this call has seen time and time again, where community processes are driven not necessarily by people in the community who live in the community, but they're driven by people who don't live in the community, and they are often well-intended, but if you don't have a core group of people from the community who are standing at the gate, so to speak, looking out for the best interests of the people who actually live there, then what you end up with is a community plan that reflects the aspirations of institutions or nonprofit organizations that may not necessarily reflect the same aspirations as the people who live there. So that's why it's important to make sure that people who live in the community are there from the ground floor. It's important that the community story is maintained and not erased, because as soon as other people grab the narrative of the community, it makes it that much easier to displace the people who live there.
Yeah.
Okay. Was
And
there another?
yeah, she also asks, how accurate can the census date be if in minority communities they don't respond to the census?
Okay, can you repeat that question?
She asked about the accuracy of the
Oh,
census because they mean minority from the
right,
community. They don't answer, they don't respond the census.
right. That's critical. It's been critical from day one, and it's even more critical now for people to respond to the census. The reason it's so important, and I think everybody who's listening on this call and even on Facebook, the reason they probably already know it, but I'm going to say it anyway. But it's terribly important for us to respond to the census because the census count determines the level of resources that come back to our communities. And if we're undercounted in the census, but yet our needs increase, then we don't have enough money to meet the needs. So a good example of that is the way prisoners are counted in the state of Illinois. In the state of Illinois, prisoners are counted in the prison town that they're in, even though most of them come from 6 zip codes here in the city of Chicago. So when the census, well, when the money comes back from the federal government based on the census count, there tends to be an over counting. They get a disproportionately higher number in those prison towns than, in my opinion, they are entitled to.
Why is that allowed? That doesn't seem fair.
It's a matter of choice. The federal government has given the states the ability to determine. So some states allow counting of the prisoners from their originating town, and some states they count the prison population. So if you were in prison at the time of the census, even if you were there for one day, if you were there the day the census was counted, then for 2 years that prison town is going to be getting your money.
So is Illinois one of those that counts the prison population in the county where the prisoner is?
That's true. Yeah, Illinois is one of those states, but then
we need to change that. That's awful.
Yeah, I was gonna say that could definitely be a campaign. I can imagine what some of the maybe historic or practical reasons behind that, but yeah, that in itself could be part of the change with the trying to get some changes with the census. If I could add, I also think that a lot of this, how would you say it? I really kind of see, and you can even say that there's a kind of a parallel with all this message about trying to get people to wear masks. Right now we live in a very individualistic culture, and so to try to appeal to people on the basis of, well, this is something that you should do for your community or something that you should do for the basis of, the other people around you. I think a lot of that falls on deaf ears, right?
Right.
I think what I'm learning from this webinar is that the census tract is really the only source of information that there really is for this kind of thing. Okay. So in addition, and I think what it is, and the reason why I say that, if it's really explained, about what the census, contains, it might make more sense to people how it is that the census is so important in terms of, the funding and the type of resources that we get in our community. Because what you are, demonstrating to us, Valerie, is that the census is really about the only legitimate source of, reliable source of information for, how we can, talk about assessments and needs in our community. And so I think that might be an important message to be able to get out there, I think.
Oh, awesome. And that reminds me, maybe we need to repeat a webinar that I did last year on the importance of the census, why nonprofits should care about this, especially now since we're trying to wrap up and they're trying to shorten everything. But yeah, if we don't get counted, then there's not going to be enough resources, and the resources that should be coming to us are going to be going to other places. And this is for 10 years. So you're stuck with this for 10 years. All right, Carlina, I'm sorry, Lauren, did I answer your question? And Carlina, did I answer the question?
I put a question in the chat, just that if you, number one, if this presentation of you're going to make it available, if you're going to, put it online for us, the slides that you're using in this presentation, if you're going to make those available.
Yeah, I'm going to, this will be available in the form of a video. So our conversation is going to be.
Okay, because then I guess if you or anyone here has any kind of like links that are on census.gov that can maybe help us like fast track. I mean, you mentioned that it's a lot of information that you have to sort through on census.gov. And if you have any tips on where to get started, I think your idea of having a webinar specifically on how to use census.gov is also a good one, and I'll be in attendance for that if you decide to do it.
Yeah, I'm going to do it. In fact, I got a call into Ileana Serrano. And that's a name you probably should familiarize yourself with. She said that she would come back and do a walkthrough. So I think it's really important to have somebody, from the Census Bureau to do that. So yeah, so look for that probably within the next couple weeks, depending on Ileana's schedule. I wasn't planning on doing it, but I think, from listening to this conversation, I think that's something we probably need to do quick, fast, and in a hurry. All righty. Carlina, were there any other questions?
No, you just answered the other question about the video, if it's going to be available later. Darlene asked the same question.
Yeah, this video will be available probably later on today. Okay.
Well, you'll do the workbook information at that point as well?
Yeah, the workbook information. Yeah, the workbook is for members of the nonprofit Utopia community. So that'll be posted in our community.
Okay.
All right. So now I'm describing, this is an abstract map. This is not meant to be representative of a geographic map. So one way to depict the asset map is with the bullseye. This map is from the Indianapolis Neighborhood Resource Center. And in my imagination, it looks more like a stomach or liver. And I know that doesn't sound, appetizing, but that's what it looks like to me. So if you're into biology, think of a liver or stomach. All right, but the way this is depicted is they're looking at neighborhood needs, and the needs and issues, I would say, they depicted a lot of negative things. But, one of the problems seems to be unemployment. Another problem is truancy, slum housing, graffiti, mental disabilities, child abuse, gangs, broken families, lead poisoning, dropouts, welfare recipients, illiteracy. So those were some of the issues that apparently a group of people from a community have come up with. And so they describe this as a map. Like I said, it's not a geographic map, but there are various shapes and colors to depict all those different issues. Okay, and then, so they describe what the issues are. And then they use another map, which seems to be the polar opposite. And again, this looks like the same stomach, but just different colors. But they have a polar opposite of all of those problems and issues. So they've got businesses, schools, parks, places of worship, income, youth, elderly, labeled people or marginalized people, artists, cultural groups, hospitals, community colleges. So these are all of the assets that can come to bear to address all of those problems. So it's a more, so you can see the difference, when I describe the thing, and it's interesting, it's kind of a pink, kind of reminds you of Pepto-Bismol, when I talked about the community needs, but then when we talk about the community assets, it's in blue, which is a more calming color. And then this map, this is literally, so we talked about the figurative maps and the abstract maps. This is a literal asset mapping. And this was put together a few years ago, back in 2005, by the city of Chicago. And this uses what we call the GIS data, is geographic data that's linked to various census tracts. And they color coded it to give you a sense, a sense for how severe a problem is, right? So this is what we would call using spatial data, using GIS data. So in this case, we're looking at Chicago senior housing. So the areas where the darker the area are, that's where you have more seniors that are concentrated in leading households, and the lighter the areas have fewer seniors. So you can see in the downtown areas, it's, the people tend to be younger. In the far south side, they tend to be younger. But on, communities on the west side tend to have older, at least when you look at communities looks like Austin, more older people. And then you have various symbols that tell you the types of housing. So you've got a triangle that represents assisted living. You got circles that depict affordable full service. You got CHA housing, which is represented by a star. So you got all these different symbols that are overlaid on top of this GIS data, all these different colors. So you can take a glance at this map, you can see immediately where the older people live, and you can also see immediately where the resources have been deployed, right? So you see in a community like Austin, you have a whole bunch of older people, you have households headed by seniors, but in comparison, they have relatively few resources. So asset mapping in this case is literal, and you can look at a glance whether or not there's a mismatch between the resources that have been deployed and the need. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And we were actually able to use this map, I use this map to help a client to actually justify getting, about $6 million to build senior housing in Austin, because at a glance, it seemed like Austin had enough resources, but then when we looked at how the resources were deployed versus where the need was, we could see that there was significant unmet need based on this diagram. Alrighty, so what do the data suggest? When we look at empirical studies, we're looking at the types of needs, we're looking at how severe the needs, and we're looking at who specifically exhibits those needs. So again, that's when you're kind of looking at the interviews and surveys and all that good stuff. The spatial studies, which is what we just looked at with those maps, it tells you where the current and potential clients are. It tells you the types, the tenure and condition of housing, land use, at least in that example. But you can use that same type of analysis to map out things like asthma. You can use that same analysis to map out things like educational attainment and poverty and all that good stuff. So that was just an example for housing. You can use spatial studies to depict, the highest concentration of people who need the services, and and look at where those resources have been allocated. And then you could do that same map. You could do that map for, say, 1970, look at it for 1980, look at it for 1990, 2000, so you can see how the conditions have changed either for the better or for the worst over time. And then when we look at the census tract data and the public records, again, that could tell you who the potential clients are, the types and tenure of housing, how many there are, and where there are. And so you can see that there's an overlap with some of these types of studies, but they're very, very helpful. Sometimes it's helpful to use as many of these as possible so that you can generate a full picture. Okay, Carlina, have you noticed any other questions?
No more questions for now.
Okay, great, thank you. All righty, so these are the 4 things that you should do, or actually you must do, in order to demonstrate need for a new initiative. And you have to do this whether there is a crowded field or not so crowded field. All right, so when you have a crowded field, it's a little bit more nuanced, but again, these are the key areas. The first thing you want to do is identify key issues of concern to the community, and you do that by, those various analyses that we just talked about, those research methods. Then you want to identify the people who are most impacted, and then you want to identify gaps in the service and or the opportunities to introduce new services. And then sometimes those gaps may not necessarily be in terms of the organizations that are providing the services, but it could be things like, we're missing a whole age group, all right? Or we're missing people in this particular area, in these particular census tracts. And then you have to demonstrate demand. Now, let's be clear, there is a difference between a need and a demand. Just because the community, quote unquote, needs something, or there is, there seems to not be enough of a service to cover everybody, doesn't necessarily mean that the community wants it. So, you can build something, and nobody comes. So when you do your strategic plan, it's very, very important that you structure this in such a way that when you develop your programs and services, it'll be a natural segue for you to really, really understand whether or not there is a demand for services, even though there is a need. All right, are there any questions about that? All righty, so if you live in a community where there seems to be a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations, again, I was telling you that in North Lawndale, there are over 200 nonprofits, and that doesn't include the churches, that doesn't include the block clubs and all that good stuff. And the question becomes, are there too many services in communities like North Lawndale? We're not the only ones. And then they're saying, there's enough. Why do we need to fund you when you got all these different organizations?
But isn't the use what's important as opposed to how many? Are they not getting to the community to provide what's necessary? Right. Even if we got 200?
Right. And that's one of the ways that you would address it. Clearly, with 200 200 organizations, and you still have this need, what's going on? And in some cases, that might be a matter of organizing the different community groups in such a way that they're not duplicating services. You know, you create a standard of services and everybody agrees that they're going to uphold those standards, and they agree not to duplicate clients so that they can have a better impact and give services in a more coordinated fashion. Or, you know, in some
Do
cases,
all those organizations, are they part of any, I guess, association of their type? So they know that each of them exists and they share information and share resources?
in some cases, yeah, I think
Okay.
there is a growing group, and I can speak for North Lawndale. There's a growing group of organizations that are, you know, coming together to actually address problems on a sector basis, but
Okay.
still the need, you know, yeah, they're
Right.
growing needs. So the next thing becomes, you know, how do you scale your services so that
Mhm.
everybody in the community who has a need in a certain area is touched? And then there's the resources. You know, do
Mhm.
foundations really have enough money to go around to do all of this? So
Mhm.
in the absence of money, what other resources do you have to actually address those problems? So it
Okay.
really comes down to not only coordinating the services, but coordinating the resources to provide those services,
Mhm.
and trying to get over things like turf battles.
Mhm.
And then sometimes there are cultural differences between the institutions and larger organizations and the people on the ground. And when I say cultural,
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily talking about race. You know,
Right.
it's a way of doing things. And
Doing things, yeah.
right. And just because you're Black working
Mhm.
in a Black neighborhood
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean you're culturally competent to
Right.
serve that. And I found that out the hard way, you know, from
Mhm.
personal experience.
Right.
You know, so I'm not criticizing anybody, but you know, we can't assume that because quote unquote the board looks like the community, that they are
Of the community,
of
yeah.
the community
Mhm.
and reflect
Mhm. Right.
the needs.
Sure.
So I digress.
No, that's important though, because if we've got all of these entities, we should be able to have a wealth of information, a wealth of services and improvement, but that's not happening.
Right. For a number of reasons. For a number of
Mhm.
reasons.
I I think that this could actually be a discussion that we would kind of have at another time, because I actually would have, quite a bit to share about this, but I don't want to, draw off of the
Okay.
of your topic. But I would definitely, I can't see who it is that's on the phone there, because all we've got is like the phone number. But as I say, I would love to, have a further discussion about this. I think, yeah, and I won't, go off into too many tangents so that I don't
Okay.
disrupt your presentation.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, this makes me happy that we're touching on stuff that is sparking interest in other areas. So you're thinking, Lauren, about, you know, having a conversation about what? Collaboration? You know, how do we?
Yeah, a collaboration that just gets on this issue. I mean, once again, I can't speak for, of course, North Lawndale, but you have similar things going on in different, communities like here on like the South Side, where it just seems like you have just a plethora of organizations, and sometimes the feeling, especially among people in the community, that not much is happening. And so how
Mhm.
is it that you can have, 200 community organizations in Lawndale, and it still seems to be a lot of the, kind of treading water feeling,
Yeah.
a lot of the same, a lot of the same thing here on the South Side. And so it'd be good to have a conversation about, yeah, are there too many nonprofits, and is there some way maybe to streamline or just be more effective with the things that we're all trying to do?
Oh, I love that. Thank you. I uh, I will definitely bring that back. I'll bring that back. That's worth discussing. in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so some of the strategies, again, you want to identify unmet needs. And obviously, we're talking about collaboration, but collaboration is more than 2 or 3 people getting together, or 2 or 3 organizations getting together and says, "Oh, there's a problem, let's go forward." There are different ways to go about creating and structuring your collaborations for impact. And one way to do that is through collective impact. And you don't necessarily have to go that far, because the actual collective impact model is a little bit more intense, but it really, really could make a difference. And when we talk about collective impact, we're looking at multiple problems in a single geography. So it could be looking at education, health and wellness, public safety, and all that good stuff, and coming up with a shared agenda and shared ways of communicating, shared ways of holding one another accountable, and all that good stuff. So there's a whole science of collective impact, which I think could really be it could really move the needle, because you're looking at problems, you're looking at more than one problem, you're looking at engaging, a significant number of players in the community who can actually, move the needle on the problem. But most importantly, it has mechanisms where you can hold one another accountable and measure the changes you're making. And if you do this right, you can actually scale your impact. So you're actually, instead of touching 150 people in a sector, you could be touching 1,000. So instead of each group, just focusing on their 50, you look at ways that several groups who are serving people can focus on their group, but then you coordinate it so they're not duplicating services. And then obviously, there's innovative approaches. So you might not necessarily have the capacity at this point to do a collective impact, but at the same time, the problems are still going on. How do you look at age-old problems in new ways, using new techniques, and hopefully reaching out to people who aren't normally part of the usual suspects? And then you need to be market-driven. And when I talk about being market-driven, you need to focus on a unique value proposition. So just because you're a nonprofit doesn't necessarily mean that you don't provide value. And Patrice, to your question earlier about social enterprise, this is one of the things that social enterprises do, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit. They start out with a unique value proposition. And value is not just things that are nice to have or that can really help. Again, we have to look at whether or not there is a demand for that thing, and whether or not the people, the intended target, actually get some value out of it. And in some cases, and in many cases, are they willing to pay for that thing?
Okay.
All righty. So bear with me. I gotta move something out of the way so I can see. All right. So again, what do you do when there seems to be too many players in a market? First thing you want to do is leverage the relationships that you have with community stakeholders. And community stakeholders could be your clients. Community stakeholders are residents. Community stakeholders, depending on what problem you're trying to solve. It could be the police department. It could be Chicago Public Schools, or, if you're in another city, it could be your local school districts. And then you want to solidify your relationships with your funders. Let your funders know, what you're thinking about doing before you actually do it, and they could actually help you to solve whatever issues that you might raise. And then you want to engage community stakeholders in the planning, get them in, on the ground floor. And when we engage, there are different levels of engagement. Engagement is not just having a survey. Engagement is not just having a community meeting to report out what has been done, right? Engaging is constant contact with people. Engaging is letting the people who are most impacted, or the people who care about the problem the most, people who have the capability to really make a difference in the solution, making sure that there is intensive touch with them, and getting their ideas, getting their strategies, and help, and letting them actually do the work versus, reporting out. And all too often in our neighborhoods, that's what happens. People do the work and then they come out to the community and tell the community what they did. And sometimes they don't even tell the community what they did. All right. And then another way to do this is to, become a thought leader, in your particular area of expertise. Institutions, foundations like working with thought leaders. And when I talk about thought leaders, these are people who know a lot about an issue. They have a different insight, more than what you will read in the newspaper, more than what you'll be reading in scholarly journals. They can say, yeah, that's true, but this is what we have found, right? And then you want to be able to differentiate your organization through, not only the quality of services, but innovative approaches. And not only should they be innovative, but you should be able to prove that you've had impact and have been able to make a difference. All right, so that's how you differentiate yourself from the masses. And then you want to strengthen your website and social media presence, because you never know who's watching you, right? Sometimes your social media attracts all kinds of resources. And then when you're dealing with funders, they're going to be looking at your website probably before they talk to you. So in your absence, your website is the only thing that they have. And then you want to enhance your brand and your total customer experience. And when we talk about brand, we're not necessarily talking about your logo. We're not necessarily talking about your model, even though those are part of your brand. Your brand is really the total experience that folks have with you from start to finish. All right, so here is an example for community needs assessment for prisoner reentry. So some of the things you might want to consider are how many ex-offenders are returning to the community on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, or an annual basis, and who cares, right? And who's really impacted by their return. That could be family, it could be victims, it could actually be store owners. What problems do they have? Again, you want to look at the literature, but you really want to talk to them and not necessarily count on the literature. You don't want to be an ivory tower, so to speak. And then you want to really understand what it is that they need to transition back. So that would be one way to kind of get the juices flowing when you're talking about doing a community needs assessment. And then, when we look at the process itself is the first thing you want to do is define the scope. How large is the problem? You want to be able to quantify the issues and really prove that it really is an issue. And then you have to decide whether or not you want to do this alone, or you want to actually, work with other organizations, work with other people. And then you collect the data, you analyze data and really come up with some key learnings. and then you set priorities and create an action plan, and then you share your findings. So in a nutshell, that's the process. And this is an example. This doesn't have to be the way you go, but this is an example of what a needs assessment could look like. You know, you could start off with your introduction, you know, which would be, you know, kind of describing how it is you came to want to study this issue, give some background information on the organization. Then you want to talk about the purpose for the community needs assessment. You know, that could be another section. And then you talk about the research methods and data collection in the next section. Then the next section, you're going to talk about the analysis. You know, what did the data tell you? What conclusions do you have as a result of doing this analysis? And then you want to look at the implications. You know, what does this mean for the work that we're trying to do in the future? What does it mean for the sector? You know, if we're to actually make a difference. And then after that, you can have a section on the recommendations. You know, what is your recommended course of action? And then you talk about, in the next section, the resources that you actually need to address the issue. So the resources could be human resources, they could be computer equipment and software, it could be money. Money is always a need. You know, so and that's going to vary. The types of resources that you need are going to vary based on the organization, based on the community, based on the segment that you're trying to measure. And then you want to look at, is it going to cost actually to actually solve that problem or put a dent in the problem? And then you'll have an action plan, and your action plan should tell, you know, what's going to be done by whom and when, you know, built in with accountability. And then you will have your appendices. All right, so that ends the PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to also share with you before we go, and I know we're running longer than I anticipated. I didn't expect you guys to have so many questions, and I'm glad that you do. I'm going to stop this share, and then I'm going to bring in, I'm going to share the screen and let you see the workbook. And Patrice, this workbook is going to be in the community after.
Okay. What section would I look under?
It's going to be on the feed. And so it'll be
FEED?
Yeah. So as you look at the news feed, and I'm also going to highlight it. So the news feed, kind of like Facebook, you know how you see different posts. So it'll be one of the top things there. And then I'm also going to put it on Discovery, and it'll be one of the featured posts. So, so you'll see it.
Great.
All right. So here is the workbook, and I'm sorry you can't see.
I'll work on trying to get on a Zoom system by the time next session.
Okay. All right.
Will we have to become a member of a nonprofit Utopia in order to get this workbook?
It's free for Nonprofit Utopia members, and it's $8 for those who are not. And the monthly membership to be a part of Nonprofit Utopia is $14.99. All right, so here is the asset mapping workbook. And I think this would be really helpful, really kind of thinking through the community needs assessment.
Okay.
All right, so we have questions that'll help you identify your target market. So questions like, what are the issues in the community? Yeah, we have space for 5, but if there are more, then, feel free. And actually, this might be more helpful if you do it in a brainstorming session. Don't try to do this all in your head by yourself. Then you can ask, what issues will we prioritize? Who else is impacted by our priority issues? How are they impacted? What will we do to address the issues? Which impacted people will we serve and why? And how we'll serve? And then you can use the answers to those questions to develop your narrative. All right. And then we got, a definition of what asset mapping is. So going over those things like, who's involved, the individuals, local associations, organizations, institutions, physical assets, economic assets, and stories. And then we go through the process of doing an asset mapping exercise. So the first worksheet, you're going to fill out a grid. So you'll list the names of people, the skills that they have, that they can bring to, whatever initiative you're trying to accomplish. And in this case, because we're focusing on strategic planning, we're going to be looking at how they can contribute to your strategic planning process and how they can help you implement the strategic plan. And because your strategic plan is the basis for your programming, then you might also think about how they might contribute to your programming as well. So you think about their role and their contributions to the initiative. And like I said, in this case, the strategic planning process, and then you list who you would, who you would contact from that organization, who you would approach. And then you do the same thing for organizations. You do the same thing for institutions. And then you go through that same thing for associations and for your government agencies, your churches, your elected officials. And then there is the bullseye, or the concentric bands, as we would also depict this. And then you would literally write on this chart. It's not really a chart, it's right on the bullseye where the people go. So at the center would be the people who are actually doing the work and what their skills are. And then outside of the center is the organizations and associations. And then your next level out would be your institutions, your churches, and government agencies. All right. And then the next page is looking at your other assets, other than people and institutions and organizations. So you've got your physical assets, and then there's a way to describe those physical assets and then talk about how they will be used by the initiative. So you got physical assets, you've got economic assets and stories. And you want to, again, describe all of that and how you're going to begin to use those for your initiative. So all of that at least helps you to map out what's going on in the community, and then that can be used as a basis for your report. All right, so are there any questions?
No.
All righty, so again, this took a little bit longer than I anticipated. I thought we would just go an hour. Sorry for keeping you longer, but I really enjoyed the questions that were asked. I enjoyed the interaction and all that good stuff. And before we leave, are there any questions?
No.
Yes, how can we connect with you? You know, I would like to, you know, discuss with you, you know, in more detail, maybe some of the ways that, you know, we can, you know, partner together. I mean, it was interesting listening to your description of what a social enterprise is, because I guess that's what our company falls into. We are a Delaware C Corp.
Oh, okay.
We are a for-profit group,
Awesome.
but definitely with a social mission. We're launching a website in September that's going to feature the work of social justice organizations.
Oh, I love
So,
it.
I mean, I you know, not to take up everyone else's time, but I definitely would like to, you know, connect with you some other, you know, sometime to see if there's some way we can partner together.
Yeah, I love this, and I'm listening to you. I teach a course in social enterprise. I might have to have you come and speak to my Roosevelt class. I was, let's see. Bear with me. I want to share the screen, but in the interest of time, you can email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. You can call me at 773-925, I'm sorry, 773-571-3886. And I'm going to share my screen very shortly and post that information. And I really appreciate your participation and all that good stuff. Am I sharing my screen now? Okay, do you see my PowerPoint presentation?
No, we still see the same screen that you had before.
Okay, so I gotta, all right, so I'm going to share one more time so you can see my contact information. And thank you for sharing yours. I just saw that, Lauren. Okay. All right, so can you see my, all right, can you see my contact information? It might be obstructed a little bit. All right, so Valerie F. Leonard at nonprofitutopia.com. And then our community is https://nonprofitutopia.mn.co. You can follow us on Twitter, and our website is nonprofitutopia.com. And you'll find us on Facebook. All right. All right. So before we go, are there any questions? And I'm going to review the chat. Okay, I got it. All right, so Lauren, you wanted me to recommend any specific links on census.gov to fast track. All right, I will share those. And okay, and I got your email address. So if there's anyone here who wants me to share further information, please post your email address and I will send you those links to census.gov. I'm going to be bringing someone on from census.gov who can walk us through that process, because their website changes so frequently. And then we will have another discussion about collaboration and collective impact. All right, did I miss anything else?
No, and I just have to say, listen, I'm probably on these like websites like, 3 or 4 times a week. And, a lot of times it doesn't matter like how popular or how many folks on it. A lot of times it is a bunch of yaya, but this has been very, direct and, a lot of information to unpack here, but it's definitely very useful.
Great, thank you so much. Music to my ears. I know I'm a very detail-oriented person, and it gets on people's nerves, but that's just the way I'm wired.
Okay. Well, thank you, Valerie. I've got another call coming up, so I'm going to go prepare for that. But you have a great weekend, and thanks a lot.
All right, and then check the form in about 15 minutes or so.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Be safe.
All right, I shall. Same to you. And Lauren, thank you. I will share those links with you as well. All right. So I am headed off, and thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for soldiering on.